Okay, so I am heavily dependent upon you all today. So Brother Joe, I think, is out of town, and he asked Brother Jason Winterland to fill in. And when I was doing yard work yesterday, I got a text in the afternoon saying that Jason's boys have the stomach bug. So I, again, will need you all's help. I came up with something for us to talk about today, and it's going to be along the same lines as what Brother Joe's been talking about. And that includes everyone who's online listening. So if you have things to contribute, please type in to the text box and Brother Walter will relay it. So what I thought we would do is take what we've been talking about with Joe. And Joe, again, for those of you all who haven't been here or are just joining the class or online just listening, Joe's been taking us through a history of the nation of Israel in the last, I would say, probably century and a half, maybe late 1800s up to present day. We resumed our downstairs class last week, and I led that discussion, so I was not here for last week. Where are you all in the timeline, approximately? Have y'all made it to 1948 yet? Okay, about there. Okay, in 67. Okay. So, so Brother Joe's been talking about the history of the nation of Israel, in present day nation of Israel. Obviously, we know from what we study as Sunday school students, and as an ecclesia, when we meet together, we study from the Bible, and that talks a lot about Israel's history, well prior to those times. But so Joe's been discussing, all of the things that had to happen historically in the European theater, for lack of a better term, for the right situations to come about, the right socioeconomic and political conditions that had to come about for things to happen for Israel to be reformed in 1948, and all the things that led up to that. While it was miraculous, you can also see a lot of the miraculous things that happened along the way to kind of bring that to fruition. So what I thought we would do is kind of go back to the scriptures today and pretend like we're using Israel today, what's going on in Israel, it being something that's happening in the media, that people are well aware of. How do we use that practically to preach to somebody? So how do we, this is all great that we're here and that we're sharing in this passionate understanding of Israel, because it's very moving when you understand the whole picture. But how do we share that with other people when it comes to opening up our Bibles? I don't know that this happens anymore, but the water bottle at work, the coffee station, the Keurig station, we'll say. So how do these conversations start? If you were to say, hey, isn't that crazy what's going on with Israel? And they say, yeah, that is so weird. Why do people care so much? Or what's the big deal with Israel? How do we answer that? And what do we do to show that we understand and convey it in a manner that inspires people to want to know God more? I think sometimes we forget about Israel until it's right in our face. Obviously, Israel, there's always things happening in Israel, but sometimes we forget about it unless it's right in our face. And we rely more on things like, well, I want to explain to them our doctrine and why our doctrine is right. So let's get right to doctrine, and that's how we're going to convert people. But what a powerful tool when there's something that's undeniable happening right in front of us. on the news unfolding before our eyes, that we can point back to the scripture and say, this is who God is, and this is why there is a God. This is why we believe, and this is why we know that God is working, because of A, B, and C. So what are those A, B, and C's that we need to be equipped with, so that when these conversations happen, not that you're going to open up your Bible by the Keurig station, but at the same time, you have these things in mind that you can share with someone about why Israel is so important. It's, without a good explanation, people would say, well, why are Christadelphians especially so obsessed with the Jews? What's the big deal? Why do they care so much? Because a lot of Christians, are kind of dismissive of the Jews. Well, they killed the Messiah. It ends there, So that's kind of their dismissal of the Jewish people. So why do we care so much about the Jews? And why does God care so much about the Jews? Did God choose them and hates everyone else and just loves the Jews? Like, is that what we're supposed to believe? Or is there a bigger picture involved? And so these are the things that, if someone only has a partial understanding of how we believe, they could think any number of those things, well, they're just obsessed with the Jews and I don't know why. Why? So we need to be able to explain to people why that is. And God explains it very well too, in terms of why he chose the Jews. And it wasn't because of anything special that they did. It was all about what he did through them, right? And so he used them as a way to reveal himself, not because, Randy, do you have your hand up? Awesome, thank you. Now I can be quiet. I'm talking and talking, aren't I? Hold on, wait for the microphone. Please.
We can start with Jeremiah 31.
Okay. You got it up for us?
I do.
Perfect.
I'll start with verse 27. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man and with the seed of beast. And it shall come to pass that, like as I have watched over it, to pluck up and to break down and to throw down, and to destroy and to afflict, so I will watch over them to build and to plant, saith the Lord. And then I'll skip over to verse 35. Thus saith the Lord, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon of the stars by light by night, which divideth the sea when the waves thereof roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, saith the Lord, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation before me forever. Thus saith the Lord, if heaven above can be measured, and the foundations of the earth searched out beneath, I will also cast off all the seed of Israel for all that they have done, saith the Lord.
Sorry. That was Jeremiah 31, verses 27 and 28, 35 and 36. Okay, so that's great verse. And I've got some verses written down myself, but I would love for you all to provide them as well. So, so I guess some of the, John, go ahead, please.
For me, I think if we go back to Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy 32, these are the words of Moses, and this is almost like a psalm that he's writing. It's like a hymn. And like in my Bible, it says Moses' hymn of joy, and he's recounting God's interaction with his people that he was, leading. And the reason why they're still to this day, they wax and wane in terms of world attention, but they're always going to be, at some point, when anything is stirred up around these people, there is going to be worldwide attention. And here's the reasons in verses 9 and 10. The Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land, in a waste, howling wilderness, and he led him about and instructed him and kept him as the apple of his eye. So because that's the assessment the Lord has of this people, they're the apple of his eye. And it talks in other places about people touching the apple of his eye, poking him in this sensitive place, his eye, essentially, that is his vision through these people. Everyone is going to know about it because these are his people. And it goes on, David talks about this. Also, he prays that he could be, the apple of the Lord's eye because he's familiar with these words. And, they were his meditation. In Psalms, he talks about that same idea about being as the apple of the Lord's eye. And this is referenced in other places too. And the reason why Jerusalem, of all places, is important because of the history, the Lord and dealing with, the patriarchs and faith that was shown through them. This has just all been, reiterated over and over again. So that's one place that I go to talk to people.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, Robert.
Yeah, I think, if we really talk about it in a way that's concise for a person at the water cooler or whatever, and say, how do you know there's a God? It says, well, the Jews. Well, how does that fit in? Well, God's plan includes the Jews, and look at all they've gone through. Every other nation has gone away, but the Jews are still here and still relevant. And also that verse, our memory verse this morning is a great place, especially this time of year where people's minds on the birth of Jesus, and but that brings the Jewish people David's throne through Jesus to this day, and he's going to reestablish that. So all of that kind of goes very nicely together. But for me, just telling somebody the Jews are one of the big reasons that I know that there is a God, because his hand has been in their lives for generations, for thousands of years.
Absolutely. I mean, to understand that really is such a gift because, you can, if you only understand, some people, I think everyone has different needs to be assured of what they're going to believe, right? And some people can say, look, I believe what the scriptures say. The Israel story is great. I already believe in God. But anytime you're questioning your faith, something comes up where you're having a trial, you're like, is there even a God out there, right? Is there a God? And the undeniable correlation and the way God has revealed himself through history is again undeniable. So you see that through how God's worked with his people. So, if we're talking to someone and obviously you would go to, so one of the questions I wrote down was, because here, a current day conflict that's happening is, from the river to the sea, right? Have y'all heard all the people that are opposing the nation of Israel are saying they want a land of Palestine from the river to the sea, which is a backhanded way of calling for the genocide of the Jewish people and their expulsion from Israel, right? So I guess the most important thing to identify is who gave the land to the Jews. Did the Jews decide to take this land? And so if we look, and these are all verses that we're familiar with for the most part, but if we look back at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 7, if someone could read that for me. So that's Genesis 12, 1 through 7.
Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee. and in these all families of the earth shall be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, into the land of Canaan, and they came. And Abram passed through the land unto the place of Sichem, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And there buildeth he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him.
So that's pretty, covers almost every base, right? So who was there? So the Canaanites were there. And God promised Abraham and his descendants that land, right? So that's the first encounter that we have of Abraham receiving this promise into the land. If we flip back to Genesis 9 and verses 20 through 25. And I'll read that real quick. It says, And Noah began to be a farmer, and this is after the flood. And he drank of the wine and was drunk and became uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. So Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done to him. Then he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be a burden. And then he goes on to bless Shem. So Canaan was the son or grandson of Noah, son of Ham, and he was cursed for this story that we could probably take a whole day trying to figure out what happened there. Something to do with, and I don't want to obviously take it too deep of dive into this, but obviously Ham, the way Ham handled seeing his dad laying in that vulnerable position and telling his brothers instead of simply covering him, I don't know. It's a complicated situation, but there was something dishonorable about what he did that upset his father. And again, this was God's will. We don't know if this was some command or if it was a tradition or something that was done, but either way, God's will was done in that Canaan was cursed, right? And so the Canaanites were the ones living in the land when Abram was promised that land, to take that land. It was the land of the Canaanites. So yes, Randy, I'm hoping someone will bail me out here. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you can go into Abraham and everything, but that's not going to mean a lot to them. You
Sure.
got to show why they are all of a sudden there, and when they are going to claim, well, it was Arab land, they took it away from them.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to show, no, this was promised that the Jews would be coming back to this land.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. And so, and I've got, more verses as we progress through, the history of the Jews taking the land. But I think if you had the audience of someone and we're going to give them an account of why you think, or why God has revealed himself through the Jews, this would be step one of, God's interaction with the Jewish people. The Jews didn't declare themselves special, and they didn't declare the land as theirs. It was through God that they were given this land, and this is how they claim ownership of this land. So,
it's really God's land. He makes that clear to them. I'm putting you there, but it's my land.
yes, absolutely. If we look at, so then we won't go through all the promises to Abraham. We know But I think it's important that we look at, so if we look at Genesis, Genesis chapter 18, this is where we get the first mention of, so 18:18, not the first mention, but one of several mentions of, so in Genesis 18:18, it says, and I'm sorry, where are we? 18, yes. He said, well, let's start in 17. He says, and the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing, since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth be blessed in him. And so that's the most important correlation that a Gentile like me or a Gentile like us need to understand, right? Is that the purpose of this interaction with God's people is so that all nations of the earth can be blessed. And how does that happen? It's through Christ, right? And so, and Christ being the seed of Abraham, and I think we've all heard and are familiar with those verses that we are part of God's plan through Abraham by becoming the spiritual seed. So other verses in Genesis 22, Genesis 26, it's all correlated to all nations being blessed through the seed of Abraham or the nation of Israel naturally, right? But we become a seed spiritually. So what, does anyone have any verses about witnesses, that the Jews are God's witnesses? Yes, I had that one too. So there's a bunch of verses there. So let's turn over to Isaiah 43. It's a long chapter, so we can highlight some verses throughout though. So Isaiah 43. David, you want to read some different verses from there? As much or as little as you want.
Well, let's see. Verse 7, it says, even everyone who is called by my name, for I have created him for my glory. I have formed him, yea, I have made him. Bring forth the blind people that have eyes and the deaf that have ears. Let all the nations be gathered together, and let the people be assembled. Who among them can declare this and show us former things? Let them bring forth their witnesses, that they may be justified, or let them hear and say, it is truth. Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. Even I am the Lord, and beside me there is no Savior. I have declared and have saved, and I have shown when there was no strange God among you. Therefore ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, that I am God. So that's a pretty powerful statement. People to the world that he's God.
Exactly. And that's what Brother Robert was saying as well. You know, it's, if you want to know that there's a God, here it is. This is how you know. This is your answer. And you don't even have to draw that conclusion. He tells you right there. This is why. This is how you know that I'm God.
You may say, well, why does that group of people prove that he's God? And it's because of the prophecies. I mean, you know, in that verse, he was saying, you know, who can declare the former things? And there's another, I think it's in Isaiah 41, it says, produce your cause, saith the Lord, bring forth your strong reasons, saith the King of Jacob. Let them bring them forth, and show us what shall happen. Let them show the former things, what they are, that ye may consider them, and know the latter end of, or declare things. And so, another verse, it says, I am the Lord, that is my name, and my glory will I not give to another, neither my praise to carved images. Behold, the former things are come to pass, and new things do I declare before they spring forth. I tell you of them. So God is saying, I can predict the future. No one else can do that. There's no other creature in this universe that can predict the future, because he's predicting it in thousands of years, not 10 years down the road or whatever. And so, he made a prediction that the people of Israel, if they didn't obey him, that he was going to disperse them throughout the nations, throughout the whole world. He was going to disperse them. And people were going to hate Jews, but that they would keep their identity, and then one day he was going to bring them all back. So you make that prediction, none of it makes any sense. Because if you're going to take a group of people and you're dispersing throughout the world, what's the normal thing that would happen? Is they're just going to blend in with the other, look at the United States. It's just a blending of a bunch of people from all over, but a lot of us don't really relate, to what our ancestors were 1,000 years ago, But the Jews still do. The Jews can trace all the way back thousands of years. So that in itself would be pretty unbelievable, that a group of people are going to be spread throughout the entire world, and they're going to keep their identity rather than blend in. But yet he says people are going to hate you, and they're going to persecute you, and they're going to kill you, and all this kind of stuff. So when you put that on top of it, it's like, why would anybody keep their heritage if they're going to be hated? The first thing you'd want to do is blend in so that nobody would ever know that you're a Jew, if people were going to hate you for a Jew. And so then you say, but why would people hate Jews? Why is it? People don't, like these different nations in the Bible back then, the Girgashites and the Hittites and the Hivites. Why don't people hate Hivites? There aren't even Hivites anymore. All those 10 nations that were in that verse, they're gone except for the Jews. But yet this was a group of people that were going to be spread throughout the entire world. They were going to be hated for being Jews. They're going to keep their identity, and then God's going to bring them back. And he's going to bring them back in one day. And that's exactly what happened in 1948.
Yeah, and further reference of that, David, is in, I think, Isaiah 42, and it's exactly what you just said. Starting at verse 21, the Lord is well pleased for his righteousness' sake. He will magnify the law and make it honorable. And then it says, the flip side of that is, but this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all snared in holes. They hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none deliver it, for a spoil, and none saith restore. So nobody wants, even to this day, for them to be restored in the land. And this is prophesied all the way back in Isaiah. Who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned? For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient unto his law. So therefore he hath poured upon him his fury and anger, and the strength of battle, and it hath set him on fire round about. Yet he knew not, and it burned him, yet ye laid it not to heart. So they, because of their sin, this is all part of their consequence for disobeying the Lord, but he wasn't going to leave them. They were going to be given for a spoil, and everybody would hate them, and nobody would want them to be restored, but that ultimately is God's plan.
Absolutely.
All right. One verse, I don't know where it is, I haven't looked it up, but the verse where it said that they would be a hiss and a byword throughout the nations. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're seeing. They were, World War II, they've always been a hiss and a byword. But today, all of a sudden, Israel is in every probably news report every day in every nation. It's just everywhere. It even overriding the war in Ukraine that we thought was the biggest event in modern time of our times. All of a sudden, Israel is a hiss and a byword in colleges over here that people want to see them. They're not justifying. They're justifying what's happened to them and everything. But Lee and I were going through scripture this week, and there's a little known verse that I had never picked up before. It's in the book of Zephaniah. It's not a book that we actually turn to regularly, but it just absolutely jumped off the page at us. It's Zephaniah chapter 2, starting with verse 1. It says, "Gather together, yes, gather, O shameless nation, before the decree takes effect, before the day passes away like chaff, before there comes unto you the burning anger of the Lord, before there comes unto you the day of anger of the Lord. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, who do his just commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility, perhaps you may be hidden on the day of the anger of the Lord." And then this very next verse is what just kind of jumped off the page. "For Gaza, shall be deserted, and Ashkelon shall become a desolation." Now you think about what we see. I actually heard on the news this past week that northern Gaza is uninhabitable. And we've seen the pictures. You just can't go back to that. But it goes on. It talked about the seacoast. "Woe unto you, inhabitants of the seacoast, you nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, lot of the Philistines." We know that Gaza is the land of the Philistines. "I will destroy you until no inhabitant is left." Think about what's happening right now. "And O you seacoast shall be pasture with meadows for shepherds and folds and flocks. The seacoast shall become the possession of the remnant of the house of Judah, on which they shall graze. And the houses of Ashkelon shall lie down at evening, for the Lord their God will be mindful of them and restore their fortunes." So just from reading this, I would suggest to you that Gaza is not going to be rebuilt. It's going to become pasture land. And I think this is one of those things. How do we know these things? Gaza is now being pretty much leveled. 2 million people have no place to live now. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not coming back as it was. It's going to be pasture land. We may be living in this verse right here. But anyway, as far as to help people understand that God has already set all this in motion, and we can turn to verses like this and say, see, this said it would happen. Because Gaza has never been desolate. They've been at war, but they've never been decimated like they are today. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because that's just amazing. I think we're living right now in Zephaniah 2:4 is actually unfolding before our eyes.
That's awesome.
So, anyway.
Thanks for sharing that. I think Walter has a point. Sorry, yeah, Walter, then John, yeah. Oh, good.
So Brother Paul Morton wanted to share with us, God has always used men and women to save, discipline, and guide his people, and his only begotten Son, Jesus, to save all of us, fulfilling the prophecy. So beautiful to see how God is using the men and women of our modern history to lead us to Jesus' return for us. I thought that was a pretty good point. Another thing I've noticed that, we always love the scriptures. That's the way we need to prove everything from. But some people are kind of skeptical even of the scriptures. So one of the things that's really nice that I've seen happen is you have the archaeologists going throughout the land of Israel, and they're digging and finding things. And the most recent thing that was just mind-blowing was they had started this excavation, and they found this set of steps just a few years ago now. And they kept digging and digging and taking all these steps out. Until today, what is uncovered is the Pool of Siloam, and has definitely proven that Christ was there, people were there, and this was Israel's land, not Palestinian land.
Yes, but there was a long time skepticism about that specific pool because they hadn't found it. Yeah. Yes, John.
I think sort of to be on the back of what Randy said, if we're speaking to somebody, if somebody's willing to talk to us about this, it's not something we can just, give them a statement. Mm-hmm. This is the start of a conversation, and it's a very long conversation, and it could be a lifelong conversation. But it's certainly not something you would lead with.
if somebody is new to all of this, but, you know, if we get into the conversation and we connect all the dots, we can go back to one of the reasons the situation exists in the Middle East currently is because when they were given the land and they entered the land, they were given really specific ways they were to take the land and to actually purge the land. And you can see in as early as the beginning of Joshua, how, you know, they skirted this with the Gibeonites, and there was a whole history of compromise and a history of, you know, not doing what they were told to do to inhabit this land. And it just set up the groundwork for today, because it's still going on. There are a mixed group of people there. They didn't fully inhabit the land as they were told to. They made essentially peace with the enemies, and what's going on today is born out of that.
Yeah,
But you wouldn't want to lead with that.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, and I think it reinforces the point that as a people or as individuals, we can never deliver ourselves. You know, they were given this land, and at different points they followed their own ways instead of the specific instructions that God gave them. And they were weak just like we're weak. And no matter how well we think we follow commandments or how much faith we think we have, we will never be able to deliver ourselves. And the nation of Israel will never be able to deliver themselves because they're never going to perfectly follow God's ways, and they're never going to perfectly execute his commandments on how, like you're saying, John, like how they were supposed to take the land and wipe out these tribes, these idolatrous nations. So it's a good, it's, you know, you can also teach, you know, good moral stories about how we are as human beings, as fleshly people, as you study the nation of Israel, because you can treat them almost as an individual like we are, you know. Yes, Walter. Hey, Roger, will you help Walter?
I was waiting for Walter to speak.
The thing I look for as I'm watching Israel day to day is an essential change of heart and mind they need to have. You remember Jason talking about the book of Malachi and things like that. And what we need to see is Israel returning to the ways of the fathers. That meaning the scriptures are important. You remember when Joseph was telling us, Israel was founded deliberately as a secular nation. They wanted to separate that out. But we know until the people turn to God and say, I love you, I want to serve you, please do something for me, and stop relying, as you pointed out, on their own might, things are not going to come into fruition. So our prayer needs to be for Israel to open their eyes and hearts and mind and heed the words of Malachi and return to God and teach their children those things.
Absolutely. And so as we wrap up, thank y'all so much for your participation. Again, I needed your help. I did not come as well prepared as I would have liked to. So as we wrap up, you know, if it's me and I'm having this conversation, I would try, like John was saying, this isn't something we're going to be able to fix in 5 minutes or to cover in 5 minutes, but, you know, a simple statement such as, you know, my reason for believing in God is the nation of Israel. Oh, really? What do you mean by that? Well, I could show you, and I could show you some verses. If you'd like to go over them with me, I'd love to do that. But for me, it's a very simple answer as to why there is a God. And this is why I believe that there's a God, because of the nation of Israel. You know, and so I appreciate everyone's input. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks.